Now it's time for our great colleague, Lawrence O'Donnell. And the last word. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Alex. It has been a joy to watch, of course, tonight.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry we were a little late handing it to you.
No. Please. Go on. I believe me, I could watch for another hour. Thank you very much.
Have a great show.
Have a great show.
Well, it was garbage day in the presidential campaign with garbage man Donald Trump actually climbing, I should say, stumbling into a garbage truck to stupidly draw attention to the free-flowing racism and bigotry at his Madison Square Garden rally on Sunday, which included a comedian no one has ever heard of referring to Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans as, quote, a floating island of garbage. Last night, President Biden said this.
And just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Well, let me tell you something. I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know, or Puerto Rico, where I'm in my home state of Delaware. They're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization is seen as unconscionable, and it's un-American. It's totally contrary to everything we've done, everything we've been.
The Trump campaign immediately and falsely interpreted that statement to mean that Joe Biden was calling all of Donald Trump's supporters garbage. The White House released their transcript of the Biden statement, which you just saw, which shows President Biden was referring to one person and what one person said. When the president said, the only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters, meaning the garbage of one of Trump's supporters that was spewed into that microphone at Madison Square Garden. Joe Biden did not call that comedian, who no one's ever heard of, garbage. Joe Biden didn't call a person garbage, not even one person. He referred to that person's speech as garbage. Joe Biden had nothing to apologize for, and he didn't. To further clarify the point, President Biden issued a written statement. Earlier today, I referred to the hateful rhetoric about Puerto Rico spewed by Trump's supporter at his Madison Square Garden rally as garbage, which is the only word I can think of to describe it. His demonization of Latinos is unconscionable. That's all I meant to say. The comments at that rally don't reflect who we are as a nation. Today, Vice President Harris said this.
Well, first of all, I think that the president has explained what he meant, but I've said it earlier. I strongly disagree with any criticism of people based on who they vote for. And that, I've made that clear throughout my career, including my speech last night before I think this all happened, which is I intend to be a president for all Americans, and including those who may not vote for me in this election. I take very seriously my obligation and my oath to concern myself first with the needs of the American people and put them before whatever might be my selfish issues.
Here's something that Donald Trump has never said. I strongly disagree with any criticism of people based on who they vote for. What you just heard the vice president say. Here's something else Donald Trump has never said. I intend to be president for all Americans, and including those who may not vote for me in this election. When Donald Trump has said something racist publicly, he has never once put out a statement to clarify exactly what he meant or that he meant something different. And yes, Donald Trump himself, of course, calls Americans garbage all the time.
And it's not her, it's the people that surround her. They're scum, and they want to take down our country. They are absolute garbage.
Scum. Garbage. There were 75,000 people surrounding Kamala Harris last night in Washington in a crowd that was 50% bigger than the last crowd Donald Trump spoke to in Washington on January 6th, 2021. Did Donald Trump mean that those 75,000 people who surrounded Kamala Harris last night, all of them are scum, are garbage? Is that what he meant? Did Donald Trump mean that everyone who voted for Kamala Harris to be our vice president 4 years ago is garbage? That's 80 million people. Or did Donald Trump mean the Harris campaign staff? That's hundreds of people. Or the vice president's White House staff, dozens of people. Or maybe the vice president's family? Did he mean her husband, Doug Emhoff, who will join us as a guest on this program tomorrow night? Donald Trump has never apologized for saying they are absolute garbage. Donald Trump has never clarified exactly who he was talking about when he said they are absolute garbage. His words were, the people that surround her, they are scum and they want to take our country down. They are absolute garbage. Donald Trump's words. Not one reporter ever asked Donald Trump about that statement. Not one. The day Donald Trump called Kamala Harris supporters garbage, no one wrote a headline about that. It wasn't a news story. The poisonous American candidate for president who uses Hitler's language constantly and calls Democrats garbage, that was not news. But the very same news media that ignored all the times Donald Trump has called American citizens and American voters scum and garbage actually tried to turn Joe Biden's use of the word garbage into a controversial news story today. And to do so, they had to refuse to listen to the actual sentence Joe Biden spoke. They had to refuse to look at the written words of that sentence. They had to refuse to understand English grammar. They had to refuse to understand what a singular possessive is. They had to refuse to understand what apostrophe S means. They had to refuse to remember what they learned in elementary school about the English language. And they can do that because this campaign is being covered by some of the best reporters I've ever seen and by some of the worst reporters I've ever seen. And the worst of them actually tried to create a controversy today and tried to equate what President Biden said last night to what the man he was condemning said in Madison Square Garden. And those reporters know that that is false. But it is the kind of false narrative that panicked, stupid campaign coverage exists to amplify. Not one of the reporters who got excited about this today asked Donald Trump to name the good things that Adolf Hitler did after Donald Trump was quoted by his White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, saying, quote, Hitler did some good things. The terrible campaign reporters and commentators who are covering this campaign, it's not all of them, just the terrible ones, are completely exploitable by Donald Trump, and Donald Trump knows it, which is why Donald Trump, the stupidest candidate ever to run for president, climbed into a garbage truck today to try to draw more attention to what President Biden said last night, which Donald Trump stupidly does not understand requires drawing more attention to what he and his vile speakers had to say at Madison Square Garden on Sunday. An event that has already cost Donald Trump the retracted endorsement by a prominent Puerto Rican entertainer. Today in North Carolina, Kamala Harris said this.
Unlike Donald Trump, I don't believe people who disagree with me are the enemy. He wants to put them in jail. I'll give them a seat at the table. And I pledge to be a president for all Americans and to always put country above party and self.
Donald Trump, the candidate who has called everyone in the country who doesn't support him, half the country, the enemy within. The enemy within, that same Donald Trump, has never said that he will give people who disagree with him a seat at the table. He has never said he will listen to them in any way, ever, under any circumstances. The enemy within candidate, who has repeatedly called Americans garbage, tried to spend the day today complaining about Joe Biden using the word garbage correctly to describe what was said at Donald Trump's campaign rally. And Donald Trump was actually able to get some people covering this campaign to fall for it and to cover what Joe Biden did not say. Much of the political news media has consistently failed you with coverage like that and can be relied on to continue to fail you with that kind of coverage right up to Election Day. Today's CNN poll shows a tie in Pennsylvania, 48-48. And in Michigan, Kamala Harris is at 48 to Donald Trump's 43. And in Wisconsin, Kamala Harris is at 51 to Donald Trump's 45. The so-called gold standard poll of Wisconsin, the Marquette University Law School poll, shows a tighter race in that state with Kamala Harris at 50 and Donald Trump at 49. Bodybuilder turned movie star turned Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger endorsed Kamala Harris today, saying, "I will always be an American before I am a Republican." Schwarzenegger attacked Donald Trump as a leader, quote, "who will send his followers to attack the Capitol while he watches with a Diet Coke," end quote. Puerto Rico's largest newspaper, El Nuevo Dia, endorsed Kamala Harris today, saying Trump suffers from psychopathic elements that he evidences by lying repeatedly. Today, in an editorial titled "Donald Trump's Cognitive Decline Becoming a Troubling Concern," the Las Vegas Sun writes, "Donald Trump's racism, sexism, xenophobia, and penchant for corruption have long made him unfit for any public office, let alone the presidency. But as he continues his bid for a second term in the White House, there is an unsettling and undeniable shift that is leading many experts, observers, and even some Trump supporters to conclude that the former president's mental acuity and sharpness are also in decline, that his physical health and stamina are waning, and that his frustration and anger are boiling over. He shambles about aimlessly, slurs his words, and sometimes speaks gibberish." Today in Wisconsin, the garbage man said this.
My response to Joe and Kamala is very simple. You can't lead America if you don't love Americans. It's true.
Don't love Americans. So I guess the garbage man will never call Americans garbage again, which he's done. The garbage man will never call most Americans the enemy within. No presidential candidate has ever publicly expressed more hatred for more Americans than Donald Trump. And no American president has ever publicly expressed more hatred for the people who worked for him in the White House. That feeling is mutual, of course, since many of the members of Donald Trump's cabinet and high-ranking White House staff are publicly opposing his candidacy now and consider him a danger to the nation in the world, including his Vice President, Mike Pence. The garbage man candidate complained that Kamala Harris called him Hitler. In fact, the only candidate in the presidential campaign this year who has ever called Donald Trump Hitler is Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, who compared Donald Trump to Hitler before J.D. Vance's miraculous conversion to a Trump running mate as comfortable with lying as Donald Trump. The new American way of death continues in Texas. ProPublica reports today on another death in a Texas hospital where a woman was refused the life-saving treatment she needed because of Donald Trump and the Trump justices on the Supreme Court and the Republican men who control Texas government, including, of course, Republican Senator Cruz, who Democrat Colin Allred is now running in a statistical tie with in that Senate campaign in Texas. Josely Barnica had a miscarriage at 17 weeks of pregnancy. She had been dreaming of delivering a sibling for her daughter. With the fetus partially emerged, the proper medical procedure would be removal and clearing the uterus to prevent a deadly sepsis infection. Texas doctors did nothing. ProPublica reports for 40 hours, the anguished 28-year-old mother prayed for doctors to help her get home to her daughter All the while, her uterus remained exposed to bacteria. Barnicka died of an infection. Donald Trump did that. Senator Cruz did that. The Republican justices on the Supreme Court did that. The men controlling the Texas government did that. Moments ago in Madison, Wisconsin, Vice President Harris said this.
Ours is a fight for the future, and it is a fight for freedom. Freedom. Like the fundamental freedom of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not have her government tell her what to do. And we all remember how we got here. When Donald Trump was president, he hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. They did as he intended, and now in America, 1 in 3 women lives in a state with a Trump abortion ban, many with no exceptions even for rape and incest, which is immoral. Immoral. And look, Donald Trump's not done. He would ban abortion nationwide. Yes, even here in Wisconsin. And he would restrict access to birth control, put IVF treatments at risk, and force states, listen to this, force states to monitor women's pregnancies. Just Google Project 2025. Read the plans yourself, and I know we all here know one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government shouldn't be telling her what to do with her body. Not the government. Not the government. Not the government. And when Congress, together with Tammy's help, when Congress passes a bill to restore reproductive freedom nationwide, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law. Here is my pledge to you. As President, I pledge to seek common ground and common sense solutions to the challenges you face. I am not looking to score political points. I am looking to make progress, and I pledge I know we can make progress. And I pledge then to listen to experts, to those who will be impacted by the decisions I make, and to people who disagree with me. Because look, unlike Donald Trump, I don't believe people who disagree with me are the enemy. He wants to put them in jail. I'll give them a seat at my table. And I pledge to always put country above party and self, and to be a president for all Americans. So it all comes down to this. We are here together for many reasons, but one of the most important, we are here together because we love our country. We love our country. We love our country. And when you love something, you fight for it. I do believe that one of the highest forms of patriotism, of our expression for the love of our country is to fight for the ideals of our country and to fight to realize the promise of America. I have always believed in our nation's promise because I have lived it. I grew up as a child of the Civil Rights Movement. My parents would take me to the marches when I was in a stroller, where people from every walk of life came together to fight for freedom and for opportunity. Growing up, I saw how hard my mother worked to give her daughters the same chances our country gave her. And I was blessed. And I was blessed to have family by blood and family by love who instilled in me the values of community and compassion and faith. I've spent my life fighting for people who have been hurt or who have been counted out, but who never stop believing that in our country, anything is possible. I have lived the promise of America. And today, I see the promise of America in all of you, in all of you, in everyone here. I see it in the women who refuse to accept a future without reproductive freedom. And the men who support them. I see it in the fathers and mothers who work hard every day for their children's future. I see it in Republicans who never voted for a Democrat before, but put the Constitution of the United States over party. And every day I see the promise of America in all the young leaders who are voting for the first time.
Vice President Harris just finished that speech in Wisconsin minutes before we started this program tonight. The Democratic State Party Chair, Ben Wickler, was there. He will join us next.
On day one, Donald Trump would walk into that office with an enemies list. You know, he talks about the enemies from within. When I am elected, I will walk in with a to-do list focused on your needs. And at the top of my list is bringing down your cost of living. That will be my focus every single day as president. I will give a middle-class tax cut to over 100 million Americans. We will enact the first ever federal ban on corporate price gouging on groceries. We will fight to make sure hardworking Americans can actually afford a place to live. And if any of you out there are caring for an elderly parent, well, my plan will cover the cost of home care under Medicare so that seniors can get the help and care they need to stay in their own homes. It's about dignity. It's about dignity.
That was the Vice President speaking in Wisconsin tonight, where CNN polling shows Kamala Harris at 51 to Donald Trump's 45. And in a Marquette University poll, Kamala Harris is at 50 to Donald Trump's 49. Joining us now, the man who's going to tell us which poll is correct. Ben Wickler, he's the chair of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. Okay, Ben, which one of those polls do you like?
I like the poll where we're 6 points ahead, but we are organizing like we're 1 point behind. Our view is that at every moment, you should expect that the next door you knock on could be the one that tips the entire election in the state that tips the entire country. And that's why we've knocked on 750,000 doors in the last 2 weeks in our state. We are on fire on the ground here. And then we come to a rally like this, a stunning speech by the vice president that sent energy through the roof in a packed arena, 13,000 people cheering their heads off for a president who actually sees young people, who sees everyone in this country and wants to be a president for all Americans. That is why we're doing this work.
Ben, I'm asking this for people I know individually who go from New York, get in their cars or trains, get down to Pennsylvania, knock on doors, people in California who go to Arizona, go to Nevada, people in these states that are neighboring some of these battleground states. And they have begun to wonder, are they doing good, or do they reach a point of possible irritation with these voters getting all these knocks on their door?
Well, what we tell people is that if they want to get their door not knocked on, they should vote. Because every day we update the voter file that goes into the minivan app on people's phones, and that tells them who has already voted, and we don't knock on those doors again. So we're trying to find every possible early voter. We cleared 1.1 million, which is about a third of all the votes cast in Wisconsin in 2020. We cleared that today, yesterday, with yesterday's numbers. We'll go further today, and we're going to keep on driving. Now, it does help because you hear over and over from volunteers, and I've experienced this myself knocking on doors, that there are some voters who are holding out till the last second to decide whether to vote or who to vote for. And even if you talk to a whole bunch of people who have their minds all the way made up, that last little fraction can make all the difference. We think 2 or 3% of Wisconsinites are undecided at this moment. And 4 of the last 6 presidential elections here have been decided by margins smaller than that, much smaller than that. So even though most of the time you're having conversations that don't move the needle, the last one that you have, that might be the one that makes all the difference. It's all hands on deck now, all the way through until the polls close at 8 p.m. in Wisconsin on November 5th.
And I just want to add, the anecdotal stuff I'm getting from people I know who are doing this, they are all surprised at how positive the people are when they do open their doors, including, by the way, Republicans and people who are going to vote Republican. People in Wisconsin apparently are very polite, as they are in Pennsylvania and Arizona and Nevada and elsewhere. Ben, what are you looking for? Is there any indication you can get from early voting about what will be happening in Wisconsin?
Well, first I should say it's a secret ballot. So no one knows who you voted for, who you're going to vote for. That news is very important, especially for a lot of women in the state of Wisconsin who might be married to people who might not be supporting Harris, women who voted Republican in the past. Over and over, volunteers in Wisconsin are finding people who have Republican histories but plan to vote quietly for Kamala Harris this time. What we're looking for in the early vote numbers is in part the gender gap. And there are more women voting. It's like a 10-point gap in early vote in person and vote by mail. If you add those two together, more women than men. That is meaningful for Harris's candidacy. We're looking at who votes and where they vote. And what we're seeing is an explosion in early voting all over Wisconsin. One interesting thing is the Milwaukee suburbs, which historically are very red, have had huge amounts of early voting in person, but there's a gender gap there too. And there may be a number of the crossover voters that Vice President Harris has been speaking to directly. So there's a lot to like about these numbers, but there's nothing that should cause anyone to rest easy. It's clear that Republicans have moved some of their voters early. That means they'll have more time to focus on the inconsistent voters in the final stretch. Democrats should not take anything for granted in the last step. And I will say, if someone wants to volunteer, they can go to wisdems.org/volunteer and sign up for a phone banking shift from anywhere in America, sign up for a door knocking shift. We do need every possible iota of energy we can put forth in each of the battleground states to make absolutely sure we end the Trump era in America forever and elect Kamala Harris.
Ben Wickler, whose workday is now endless, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Lawrence.
And coming up, tomorrow the Harris campaign is heading for Nevada, where the campaign is planning another huge star-studded rally to try to win that state, both for Kamala Harris's campaign and for our next guest. Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen of Nevada. That's next.
She stepped up for us. Like I said, nobody gave her this. She stepped up. She did it for us. She's been doing it for 14 and a half weeks. We got 6 days more. She's going to go to Reno and come back here. We're going to have a big rally. I will be there. And let's just cheer her on to the White House.
That was the Vice President's husband, Doug Emhoff, in Las Vegas earlier today. Doug Emhoff will join us on this program at this hour tomorrow night. Vice President Harris will campaign in Las Vegas tomorrow with Jennifer Lopez, a proud member of the Puerto Rican community who grew up in the Bronx in New York City. In Las Vegas tonight, the Harris campaign has placed its physically biggest ad, a 366-foot message on the exterior of the Las Vegas Sphere. Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, has poured more than $6 million just in the last 2 weeks into the Nevada Senate race to try to prevent Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen from being reelected.
Growing up in a working class family, I never could have imagined that I'd run for elected office one day. I was first in my family to graduate from college, taking out student loans and working many jobs, including as a cocktail waitress at Caesar's Palace to make ends meet. I built a career as a computer programmer in a male-dominated field. But I've also been a caregiver for my family and served as the president of my synagogue. It's an honor to be the first former computer programmer and synagogue president in the Senate and the second woman senator in Nevada history. We've accomplished a lot for Nevada, investing in our infrastructure, expanding health care for our veterans, bringing thousands of good-paying union jobs to our state. And I'm running for re-election to continue delivering results.
Joining us now is Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen of Nevada. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. The campaign is coming to Nevada tomorrow. What do you think the vice president needs to do in Nevada? What is the message that voters need to hear from her for her to make it over the top and for you to get to 51%?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me and thank you for showing off the Sphere. It is amazing. Come to Las Vegas and see it. But to your point, what the vice president has to do is deliver her message of hope and opportunity. This is what people are looking for. In Nevada, we're a purple state. We're pragmatic. People want a pragmatic problem solver. I happen to be rated one of the most bipartisan, effective, and independent senators serving today. And 90% of the bills I introduce are bipartisan. And so what we have to do is to continue to invest in our communities, to fight the corporate greed, and really build our middle class up. And this is what the vice president has to remind people. I believe we're at our best when we're working towards something, towards a brighter future, towards our own opportunity. And this is a message of hope that she's bringing to everyone for a new day for our country.
Is it your sense that Nevada voters know Kamala Harris better than many other states do because it's a neighboring state to California where she was attorney general and senator?
Well, I think that's probably true. She's been here an awful lot over the years. And of course, she's been here a lot since she's been running for president. And I think that her message really resonates. I can tell you here on the ground, we've had a lot of enthusiasm. We're knocking doors. We have our culinary union. Actually, you showed that I put myself through school as a waitress. I was a member of our culinary union here. It is so strong. They're knocking on doors, all of our labor. We've got the enthusiasm. And I think tomorrow, when she gets on that stage, when she talks to us here, it's going to drive voters out and our enthusiasm through the roof. And I can tell you, for helping us do that, if they want to go to rosenfornevada.com to help pitch in these last, well, now just about 5 days to go, we need all hands on deck to turn out our vote.
Senator Jackie Rosen, a graduate of the Caesar's Palace serving crew. I did not know that. I learned that tonight. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And tomorrow night, as we cover the Harris campaign events in Nevada, we will be joined by second gentleman Doug Emhoff for an exclusive interview here on this program. That's tomorrow night, right here, 10 p.m. Eastern. And up next, the man in charge of saving the United States Senate for the Democrats is Senator Gary Peters, who has done it before. Senator Peters joins us next. In every presidential election, the Supreme Court is on the ballot. If Donald Trump wins, he will easily convince Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito to retire, and he will replace them with Florida Judge Aileen Cannon, who has dismissed the federal criminal case against Donald Trump for possession of classified documents in violation of the Espionage Act, and some other Trump-supporting judge to be named later. The next justices appointed to the Supreme Court will have control over your lives for at least the next 30 years. Clarence Thomas is in his 33rd year as a Supreme Court justice. If Republicans win control of the Senate, they will not confirm any Supreme Court justices nominated by a President Harris, which makes your vote for United States Senate the second most important vote you will cast this year. Axios reports that a super PAC affiliated with Republican leader Mitch McConnell is pouring $42 million into an ad blitz in blue wall states to win control of the Senate. Joining us now is Democratic Senator Gary Peters of Michigan. He's the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, and importantly for tonight, he is the chair of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. He is the senator who has been given the political job of saving the United States Senate for the Democrats, the most difficult political job any senator's ever been given. But, Senator, you've done it before. What do the lessons of 2 years ago mean for you tonight?
Well, it's great to be with you again, Lawrence. Thank you. Well, I think we had a lot of lessons from the last race, and basically we're seeing that play out again. You know, we knew that last cycle they would be very close races. All of them would be in the margin of error going right into the race. We had a very solid ground campaign, and all of our campaigns were able to execute effectively to bring in the votes, and we're doing it again. It's basically the same playbook that we used last cycle and made history. We're going to do it again. Certainly all of our races right now are in the margin of error, or I would say the margin of effort of what we have to put forward right now. But we have superior ground operations. We also have superior candidates. Our Democratic incumbents and candidates are far superior to flawed and deeply flawed Republicans. We got to continue to paint that contrast, as well as making sure we're getting every single voter to the polls, voting absentee, early voting, et cetera. And we're going to run through the tape. But as you mentioned in the opening, the Republicans are dropping a lot of money here at the end. McConnell is putting in massive amount of money. We need to continue to plug those gaps. That's why I have defendthesenate.org, which is my site to raise resources, because as we plug those gaps, we can continue to run through the tape. But this is not over till it's over. We've got to put everything on the table right now.
So we're also watching some campaigns we haven't seen before, which is, for example, Colin Allred's challenge to Senator Cruz in Texas running so strong, opening up a possibility for you of winning a seat that you don't currently, those Democrats don't currently have. Same thing in Florida, possible Senate, a very viable Senate campaign in Florida. What does that do to your calculations when it's more than just trying to hold on to what you have?
Yeah, you know, a good offense is always a good defense, and that's what we're doing with these other states that are very real. You mentioned both Texas and Florida. You know, we're putting resources in, but they continue to need those resources. It's very tight, especially right now in Texas. Some very good polling coming out where actually Colin Allred's up a little bit, but we still have a ways to go. And certainly a big issue in Texas is reproductive freedom and just the horrendous law that is there. think you talked earlier about a woman who lost her life as a result of the Texas law, one that Ted Cruz supported and continues to support. It's outrageous. We should never be in a situation where women cannot get quality health care in their own state. It's absolutely unacceptable. Colin Allred is a champion for reproductive freedom, and we expect people will turn out in big numbers to let folks know that this is unacceptable in Texas. It's certainly unacceptable in every state in the union, but it's a huge issue in Texas and a clear contrast between Colin Allred and Ted Cruz.
At this stage of the campaign, is women's freedom the clearest and strongest issue that the Senate candidates have going into Election Day?
Well, it depends on every state. So every state has their issues. Clearly, this is a big issue, reproductive freedom and freedom just generally and protecting democracy. But we've been talking a lot about the economy, that you have Kamala Harris as well as our Senate candidates have been doing meaningful things to help people with prices, bringing down the cost of prescription drugs, providing opportunities for small businesses to get the resources they need. So an economic message is critically important for all of our candidates as well, and a big part of what they are running on. We're basically about providing solutions to the tough problems that we face in this country. Republicans and Donald Trump are all about the past. They're all about election denial. They're about dividing people, about insulting folks, disrespecting people. We're about, picking ourselves up by the bootstraps, going to work and getting things solved for the American people so that everybody has the opportunity to have a better life and to live their version of the American dream. That's what's on the ballot. And that's why we are going to win not only the presidency, but we're going to hold and very likely expand the majority in the Senate.
Senator Gary Peters, who worked a miracle for Senate Democrats 2 years ago, said they rewarded him by asking him to do it again. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Senator.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. That is tonight's last word.